how people wore their hair and how they brushed their teeth. We know what clothes they wore on top and what they wore beneath. We know how people ate their food and on what sort of plate. 'Cause Gerald rode on Wales in 1188.
We know they did in Bath a lot, but often washed their feet. And how they played the flute and how they cooked the meat. We know that people took the cross and how they met the fate. When Gerald rode on Wales in 1188.
We know that if you had the flu, you couldn't take the pill. The things the doctors gave to you could make you much more ill. We know that even then the roads were in a dreadful state when Gerald rode on Wales in 1188. This is the story of Gerald's journey around Wales. Unfortunately, it's in Latin, and I don't speak Latin, but I can write my name. Of course, Gerald wouldn't have gone on this journey at all if it wasn't for the Crusades. I can tell you all about it, because I was there. That's Gerald. I know, because 800 years ago, I was his page. Gerald was an important priest and politician, and he wanted to travel around Wales to persuade people to join the Crusades. But for that, you need an archbishop, preferably of Canterbury. Our Archbishop of Canterbury was called Baldwin. Baldwin had been asked by King Henry II to find soldiers to fight the Saracens in the Middle East. Of course, if you're going on any journey, you need transport. This was 1188. And you need provisions. Provisions for Gerald, provisions for the Archbishop, and provisions for the page. These are optional. And so we set off. From Radnor, past Hay, and Brecon. People were very keen to join the Crusades. Gerald gave a lot of speeches. Most of them in Latin. And a lot of people decided to take the cross. Taking the cross means wearing a cross. That's what you do when you vow to go on a holy crusade to fight the Saracens in the Middle East. It is a man's life in the Crusades. You learned how to handle the latest weapons. It was an adventure. You got to see the world. This world. And the next. And so we travelled all the way around South Wales. We always took the quickest route, even if it meant going through quicksand. But fortunately, nobody was hurt. At night, we stayed in castles like Swansea, or Kidwelly, or in abbeys like Margam. And sometimes we slept in people's houses. And so we came through the land ruled by the most powerful prince in Wales, Rhys ap Griffith. Rhys was a cousin of Gerald's, and Gerald thought he might persuade Rhys to join the Crusades. Perhaps his sons would go too. But Rhys' sons would rather kill each other than kill Saracens in the Middle East. In Haverfordwest, Archbishop Baldwin gave a long sermon. He said, every sinner deserved to go to hell. Some would burn, some would freeze, some would be eaten by hungry worms, and some would be sawn in half. Every man was a sinner, and sinners could only go to heaven if they agreed to take the cross. Even thieves and murderers would be forgiven. Sometimes Baldwin had to use an interpreter. Sinners of Haverfordwest and outlying districts as far as Carmarthen, come on down! A lot of people came forward to take the cross, but some of the women didn't want their husbands to leave them. Gerald said the Crusades were a holy mission, and that God would punish those who opposed it. And sure enough, that night, the woman turned over in bed and flattened her son. We stayed at Rhys's castle at Cardigan. Rhys's court was well ordered. It even had a falconer and a dung collector. Rhys was extremely hospitable. We were given water to wash our feet. Our guards hung up their weapons, and the steward conducted us to the main hall to eat. People were seated according to their rank. The important people sat next to Rhys. There was a fire in the middle of the hall, but no chimney, only a hole in the roof, and the lighting was very subtle. Rhys had his own candle holder, and according to the laws of Howell the Good, he was entitled to Rhys's leftovers. And to bite the top of the candle. The laws were very complicated. Some people were entitled to the king's mantle, others to the queen's handkerchief. Rhys laid on some fine entertainment. He was fond of music, whether it was played on the harp, the crwth, or the pibgorn. Rhys had held one of the first Eisteddfodau. We all agreed we had heard nothing like it before. Rhys had his own jester. And after dinner, the court poet recited a composition in praise of Rhys's noble deeds. The song clearly went to Rhys's head. Gerald thought it would be a good time to ask Rhys if he would do more noble deeds and go to fight the Saracens in the Middle East. Rhys said he would love to, only he couldn't leave his dear wife Gwenllian. But he hoped there'd still be a place for his sons. Soon it was time to go to sleep. There wasn't much privacy. Everyone slept in the same bed, which was stuffed with rushes. For bedtime reading, Baldwin read The Topography of Ireland. It was Gerald's favourite book. He wrote it himself. When the watchman sounded the bell, it was time to put the lights out. We needed our sleep. It had been a long, tiring day. A very tiring day. It was an even longer night. I was afraid to go to sleep. In medieval Wales, they didn't have alarm clocks. So in the morning, we were woken by a cockerel. We got up and cleaned our teeth with the hazel shoots and rubbed them with an old woolen cloth, but it made our teeth shine like ivory. Then we were ready to set out on our journey. Gerald and Baldwin wanted to visit cathedrals, monasteries and abbeys. There were over 40 abbeys in Wales. We had passed Llantoni Priory, Margam Abbey, monasteries at St. Dogmaels in Whitland, and we stayed in the abbey at Strata, Florida. If you're on a pilgrimage, a holy mission, or simply old and sick, you're always welcome at an abbey, especially if you had an archbishop with you. Gerald was a monk himself and liked to visit monasteries. Gerald had always wanted to be a priest. He learned to read and write in a monastery, and his great ambition was to become Archbishop of St. David's. And it was in the monastery that he became interested in one of his favourite hobbies, collecting tithes. Tithes were a sort of tax. Everyone had to give a tenth of what they earned to the church, and Gerald was very keen to make sure that they did. Of course, other people had different reasons for wanting to become a monk. Gerald told us about a man called Elidir, who spent most of his youth underground with the fairies. But eventually, he grew too big to live with the fairies. But when he saw the world above ground, he was so disappointed. So he became a monk. And then Gerald told us another story about a man was locked in an embrace with a beautiful woman. When she suddenly turned into a hairy beast, he ran straight off and became a monk, and I don't blame him at all. Of course, monasteries were always open to people in need. Gerald used to tell a lot of stories about people having a hard time, where they were tied up in a bag, being eaten by toads, or found that your hand was stuck to a pillar in St. David's Church, or even if you were a knight, giving birth to a calf. Gerald thought it was a punishment from God. Of course, in those days, even the nicest people might turn out to be demons. There were demons and spirits everywhere. Gerald said that an unclean spirit could tear off your clothing, item by item. Even a locked door was no protection against an unclean spirit. When we arrived at Strata, Florida, a monk showed us to our quarters, past the refectory, past the library, and past the lavatorium. Abbeys might take as long as 30 years to build, and Strata, Florida wasn't finished yet. The masons were still at work. They used people they knew as models. Rhys paid for the monastery to be built. He thought that was one way of making sure he got to heaven. The monks would be so grateful, they'd pray for him. Strata, Florida had its own share of saintly relics. These were usually the bones of great saints. People believed that these relics had miraculous healing powers. Of course, abbeys are run by monks, and monks belong to all sorts of different orders. Brother Gwilym is a Cistercian, and Gwilym is wearing a natty little number in Frou Frou Hessian. Like most Cistercians, Gwilym likes going to Mass, coming back from Mass, and building monasteries in damp, unpleasant locations where he wouldn't be tempted to do anything silly. Brother Gilbert is a Carthusian, and Gilbert is sporting a handsome hair shirt with a matching canvas outfit. Discomfort guaranteed. His interests include taking vows of silence, fasting to the point of death, and generally having a very bad time of it. Brother Benedict is a Benedictine, and Benedict is wearing a versatile black outfit in fully fitted hemp. His hobbies include praying for the dead, praying for the living, and singing psalms. In a few hundred years, he hopes to invent a famous liqueur. The monks at Strata, Florida were Cistercians. The monks were made to work very hard, in the fields, or helping their fellow monks inside. Monks had to follow strict rules. When they weren't working, they spent their lives in prayer and worship. They had to say Mass at all hours of the day and night. Matins were between midnight and 2 o'clock. Prime was at 6 o'clock. And then chapter Mass was at 8 o'clock after breakfast. If you fell asleep, a monk would wake you up by shining a light in your eyes. After high Mass at 11, everybody went to lunch. Because everyone ate with their fingers, the monks washed their hands in the lavatorium before every meal. But they only took a bath 3 or 4 times a year. Whilst we're eating, a monk read from a religious book. You weren't allowed to interrupt the reading with any sort of noise.